police officer visited my fifth-grade classroom as part of DARE, Drug Abuse Resistance Education. He warned us about the dangers of recreational drug use, and he offered tips for resisting peer pressure to inhale, imbibe, and inject. He assured us that using illicit substances would trigger disastrous consequences, making them unsafe, even medically. After learning this lesson as a kid, I was surprised when I found out that many now banned substances were once considered medicine. Cocaine, for example, was used to treat morphine addiction. Heroin was marketed as a cough suppressant. This new knowledge sparked an intellectual curiosity. How and why do substances shift from being good medicines to bad drugs? Acid revival was driven by my fascination with this question. Common sense suggests that the most heavily regulated drugs are the objectively worst drugs. However, as historians and sociologists have repeatedly demonstrated, a drug's classification reveals more about the context in which it was created than objective assessments of its chemical properties and biological effects. Pharmacology is only half the story when it comes to drug classification. Someone who snorts cocaine, for example, will notice an increase in heart rate and body temperature. But this description doesn't tell us much about why cocaine, a substance that can have negative effects on its users, is federally classified as a Schedule II substance, while alcohol, which also has adverse effects, remains exempt from scheduling. Sociologists would say it's because drugs are socially constructed, which means that drugs gain different meanings in different settings. Drug classification depends on culturally and historically specific beliefs and values about the body, health, and morality. Saying that drugs are socially constructed doesn't mean that drug abuse is a fantasy made up in the minds of power-hungry politicians, worried parents, and rating-scrubbing journalists. Yet, how drugs are constructed shapes people's actions, behaviors, and identities. It's classic Thomas theorem, the sociological maxim that if people define situations as real, they have real consequences. For example, as I write this, a cancer patient living in Colorado can legally purchase cannabis to help ease physical pain. But if she tries to do the same thing in Nebraska, she risks being arrested. The line between street drug and prescription medicine is thus not given or fixed. It emerges from an ongoing struggle over definition. A Greek word captures the ambivalent meaning of drugs, pharmakon, which, roughly translated, means drugs are both panacea and poison. As a double-edged sword, drugs can bring their users both pleasure and pain. French philosopher Michel Foucault described dropping acid in the California desert as the greatest experience of his life. Another famous French philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, hallucinated that a cast of crabs followed him everywhere for nearly a year after he tried mescaline. Perhaps this is why Aldous Huxley wrote of his own mescaline experience, that there is a heaven and a hell when it comes to psychedelic drugs. And that, in my mind, is what is so troubling for many people about psychedelic drugs. These drugs destroy that thing that many of us find comfort in, but don't often think about: boundaries. Boundaries are socially constructed lines that help us maintain order and sanity by erecting distinctions to keep some things in and others out. Sociologists like myself love boundaries. In fact, boundary drawing is such a fundamental social process that some sociologists call it the stuff of sociology. The way boundaries are drawn reveals much about the dynamics of our social order and the precarious foundation on which it rests. Boundaries are actively reinforced, contested, and subverted. Psychedelic drugs embody the fluidity and uncertainty of boundaries. They don't just swing from the good to the bad, from the blissful to the weird. They dissolve the space between. Psychedelic drugs like LSD and psilocybin share a similar pharmacological profile. Each acts on serotonin receptors in ways that produce temporary but drastic changes in perception, cognition, and emotion. A psychedelic trip can make a few minutes seem like a few hours. Like Alice visiting Wonderland, rooms can feel...